welcome everyone to our continued education series on Acumatica. Today we'll be going over budgets by John Cooper. John is a new hire to Network, but has a lot of experience with Acumatica, and we were excited to have him join our staff. And so the best way of throwing him into this is have him do some training right away. So we're excited to have John go through this. Just as a quick reminder, everyone's phones are on mute for today. So please use the questions feature that's in the GoToWebinar. And we also have Dan St. John on here to answer any questions that might come up. So between Dan and John, I think we've got a great panelist on the network side. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you and have you teach us about budgets today.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. As Stuart mentioned, my name is John Cooper. I'm one of the senior business analysts with the Acumatica team at Network, and very happy you all could join today. We wanted to take the next half hour or so to go through a budgets overview, look at the budget functionality within Acumatica. As Stuart mentioned, all the phones are muted. If you have a question, please, if you would, type it into the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. And looking at the agenda that we wanted to use for budget overview today, we wanted to take a quick look at adding a ledger to the system and what that means. We can use ledgers to track actual or budget or other kinds of information within the system. And that will be the first step to getting our budget processing going. Take a look at how to enter budget information. There are different methods for entering budget information. We'll look at manual entry, uploading data from a spreadsheet, or there's a function within Acumatica that will allow us to preload budget data based on other data that we might have access to in the system. And we'll also take a look at different structures of budgets. There's a very straightforward, simple structure for budgeting, and there's also a hierarchical budget structure, which is based on something called a budget tree. We'll take a look at those different structures as we're walking through the different methods of data entry. Once the data has been entered, we will release it, fairly similar to the way we would release or post GL transaction information or any other kind of transactional data within the system. So we'll walk through that releasing step. And then finally, we'll take a look at different ways of reporting, different areas of the system that we can look at that will allow us to look at budget versus actual or just the budget data that we have in the system. So we'll start with just a quick mention of prerequisites. And in this case, the term prerequisite, we're kind of cheating a little bit, not an absolute necessity, but in the examples that we will look at today, the budget information is going to be at the actual account and sub-account level. So in the training database and the sales demo database or environment that we'll look at, we have enabled sub-account processing in both of those environments. So just wanted to throw out a mention there that in these examples, sub-account functionality is turned on. That's part of the advanced financials within the enable and disable features list. Not absolutely required, but definitely part of the budgets that we'll look at here within the training environment. And to do that, to set that up, we would need to both enable the sub-accounts feature, and then obviously we need to add sub-account data to the environment. So we've done both of those things in the training environment. We have sub-accounts, which are two segments, one for product ID, the second, as you can see in that screenshot, the second segment is focused on department, and we'll see that come into play as we look at the examples here within the training environment. So the first real step to getting going with budget processing is adding our ledger. We will use the ledgers screen, and I'll transition now from the PowerPoint into Acumatica. We're using Acumatica 2020 R1 as the environment that we're looking at, and this is one of the training tenants that I have. And to get to the ledger screen to help us set up our first step, we're going to use the ledger screen, which you can see is part of the financial series. If I cheat and look over here at the financial series, ledgers is the place you want to go. And this first step is really straightforward. It's simply going to be adding a ledger to the system that will allow us to track budget information. And as you probably already know, ledgers can help us track actual GL data, can help us track budgets, which we're going to look at today. Also allows us to track reporting or statistical information, and we'll see how the ledger setup points at one of those categories. And in this case, I'm going to use my optimistic budget as the example for budget setup that we can look at here briefly. So you see in the first field, we're identifying the ledger ID. In this case, we've got an optimistic budget that we're setting for our companies. And in the third field, we're setting the type as budget. We'll see in a second as we set up a new ledger ID that's where we would find those different categories of different types of budgets. And then in the bottom of the screen, we're associating this ledger with any of the companies that are available in my tenant. So in this training tenant, we have the Muffins and Cakes Company or the Sweet Life Fruits and Jams. These are training companies, and those are associated with different branches. You can see in the drop down up here that that's the makeup of the environment that we'll be working with for our examples today. We've got two companies, 2 or 3 branches associated with each, and in this case, the optimistic budget has been set up and associated with those 2 companies and those 5 branches. So an example of creating a new ledger ID, I'll just use a test ledger ID and description. And really the key to setting up the ledger is simply associating it with the budget type. So that's the key to that first step, setting up the ledger. We would want to make sure that the budget type is used, and that will tell Acumatica that we're creating budget information, adding budget data to the system, and then when we want to use either an ARM report or a generic inquiry, Acumatica would know what type of data it was to create the right display. So creating a ledger, we would set the ledger ID, description, and type, and then we would also associate it with any of the companies in the database that we wanted to associate with. And really, that's all there is to that first step. When I save, notice that I've manually added the companies that I want associated with this ledger, and Acumatica already automatically associated any of the branches that are available with those companies for this ledger ID. So that's all there is to step 1. In step 2, which is a big step, this is where we're going to do most of our processing. This is going to be adding the actual budget and the budget data to the system. And we're going to do that within a second screen, the budgets screen. So I will get over there. Notice that budgets are also part of the financial series. If I look at the financial panel, I have budgets. We'll talk about release budgets, and toward the end, when we're talking about reporting, we'll look at the GL budget edit. For most of the work that we're going to do within the overview today, it'll be part of the budgets screen. So notice that at the top of the screen, the identity for the budget, the specific budget that we're working with, will be the combination of the branch, the ledger, and the financial year. And so once we fill out those three identifiers, we will get access to all the different accounts and sub-accounts that we want to track for this specific budget. Also notice that at the top of the screen, there is a toggle and off-on switch for the tree view. And that's an indication, we mentioned before, that there are simple budget structures and there are also hierarchical budget structures. In the tree view, we would look at the hierarchy style of budgets. We're going to start by looking at one of the simple format budgets. So I'm going to turn that tree view off. So in our header, we're going to, in this case, my example is going to be pointed at the retail branch. And we're also going to look at that optimistic budget that we referred to before. And in this case, we're going to look at the years 2019 or 2020. And when I do that, once I've got the three identifiers noted in the summary portion of the screen, the body of the screen is going to focus on the row by row layout of the budget. And each row, as you can see, is identified by the account and the sub-account. Sub-account is that two-segment format that we mentioned before. And for each row, I'll have account, sub-account, description, and then an amount, which is the annual amount. To the right of that, we see that annual amount broken down by fiscal period. So I know what the budget amount is for each of the fiscal periods for the year. And then this distributed amount field column is simply the sum of all those fiscal periods. So whatever I have in periods 1 through 12, in this case, will be summed up and displayed in the distributed amount. And the assumption is that we would want to fully and completely distribute that annual amount through all of my fiscal periods, and that once I'm ready to release this budget line, the annual amount would have to be fully distributed, so those two columns would need to be equal. My annual amount needs to be equal to my distributed amount. We'll see an example of that as we go through our first manual entry example. So that's the format, and that's really the complete format for the simple budget structure. It's simply a listing of all account, sub-account combinations, how much we're budgeting on an annual basis, and how that breaks down into all the fiscal periods. So as I move from 2019 to 2020, we'll see that there are different ways of updating the budget or loading budget data for this branch, ledger, and year. The three ways that I can manage that data would be manually. I can add rows similar to many other Acumatica screens. I can add rows, and I'll go through an example of that. We'll also, in our next examples, look at ways that we can load data from a spreadsheet, also similar to many other Acumatica screens, or I can preload articles, and this will be unique to budgets. Preloading articles means that I'm looking at some other data that's already in the system, whether it's another budget or maybe actual data that I have, and I'm using that data with a multiplication factor to get a jump start on establishing my budget, my new budget that I'm creating. So in my first method here, we said that manually adding data would be one of the methods that I have for establishing. So I'm going to use the office expense line, and all I need to do is create that new row type in the account and sub-account, and in this case, maybe I want to budget 4,800 for the year. And notice that as I've entered the annual amount, the 4,800, nothing automatically happens to the fiscal periods. That's our next step. We need to tell Acumatica what we want to do to break down that annual amount into the fiscal periods. And there's different ways that Acumatica has of helping me with that. At the most basic level, I can manually enter what I want in each one of those periods. Notice as I'm typing into what I want for period 1 and 2, the distributed amount field is keeping up with me and keeping a tally of what is the sum for those 12 fiscal periods. And notice also that over here on the left, I have a warning message that reminds me my total distributed amount, my sum of periods 1 through 12, is not yet equal to the annual amount that I have. And it's reminding me because as long as this is the case, I'm not going to be able to release that budget line. So I need to get these two in sync before I'm able to release the budget. So we want to take a quick look within this manual entry. We want to take a look at what are the different ways Acumatica has of helping me with that distribution. How can I automate that process of distributing the annual amount into the fiscal periods other than the manual entry that we've seen. And so to help illustrate this, we're also going to, at the same time, we're going to take a look at another feature of the budgets screen, which is the compare feature. So in comparison, what we're getting at is right now, my format to the screen is one row per account sub-account combination. If I switch into the comparison mode, what's going to happen is I'm opening up a secondary line for each account sub-account combination, and I'm going to be able to compare kind of side by side what is the amount that I'm budgeting with something else that I want to see to make sure that the amount that I'm budgeting for this year is kind of reasonable. So a good example of this would be, what if for that same retail branch, as I'm budgeting for year 2020, what if I wanted to see kind of a side-by-side comparison of the actual amounts in those accounts for last year, for 2019? And as I've filled out those three identifiers in the summary, notice that it now automatically shifts the screen into a double row per account sub-account combination. And for each one of those account sub-accounts, I can see not only the amount that I'm budgeting, but the comparison amount. So that's just a little bit of a different way to use the screen, maybe a way to get information as I'm budgeting for my different accounts. And going back to the topic that we were talking about, how to distribute that annual amount into periods 1 through 12. So I've got the manual entry into each period that we looked at before, but there's also an automated way of getting that distribution accomplished, and that is done through the distribute button. And once I've opened up distribute, now my goal is to take this 4,800, distribute it into the 12 fiscal periods, and there's three different methods I have of getting that done. I can distribute evenly, period to period. I can use the second choice to proportionally based on the previous year. And in that case, I would look at the retail branch and the optimistic budget for the previous year, 2019, and I would use the percentage allocation period to period that this account sub-account combination had used for the previous year, and use that same period to period breakdown to establish the way I'm breaking my 4,800 for the year 2020 into those periods 1 through 12. So I can do it based on the previous year, or I can also base it excuse me, I can base it on the percentages for whatever the comparison values are. In this case, I've set the comparison values for the actual data from 2019, and I can use those values that I'm seeing here within the screen to break down the new budget amount that I have for 2020. In this case, I'm going to use the even distribution method. We also notice that there are options here that refer to the node or the subarticles. We'll see what that means in more detail once we get through to the hierarchical budgets. And in this case, I'm going to update. Notice now that my 4,800 is evenly distributed to the fiscal periods. I have my total distributed amount at 4,800. No more warning message. My amounts are in sync. So at this point, I can not only save, but I would be able to release that budget line into, I can release it, and that would make the budget available to reporting and to the generic inquiries and so forth. So we've taken a look at manual entry. A second way of updating or loading budget data would be through this load records from a file. In this case, I'm going to temporarily, I'm saving 2020. I'm going to go back to 2019 as an example for my upload from file. And what I'd like to do here is very similar to the upload from file feature that I have in many other Acumatica screens. I'm going to click that icon, choose my file. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to take a quick look at that budget retail file for 2019, just to notice that my top line sales account, I'm changing the budget. I'm becoming increasingly optimistic, and I'm going to update that top line to an annual amount of 28,800. Now that cheat look at the Excel file was not part of the process necessarily, but I wanted you to see that we're uploading 28.8, and that's going to increase the amount that I previously had of 27 for that top line sales account. So I grab that 2019 file, say I want to upload. I have different modes of uploading. I can update existing and load new lines, or I can bypass the existing. And in this mode, I would not touch anything that's currently in Acumatica. I'm only loading new lines, or I can insert all records, and we need to be careful with that. There's some possibility of duplicate entry based on the data type that you're working with. In this case, I'm just going to load existing and new lines, do the typical column comparison, and we'll see after it gets done processing that I've updated my top line sales account to 28.8. So that's a fairly quick example of how we would upload the budget from an Excel spreadsheet. Those two examples, the manual entry and the upload from file, were both done with the simple budget format. And we also took a look at how we could distribute the annual amounts and the different methodology there. Now we want to switch gears, and I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to look at
Hey,
the
John.
different budget. Yes.
We did have one question that came in at the beginning, but you've been going so well and so steady that it was just, I didn't want to break off your pace here, but
Right.
it was back on sub accounts. It says, when you turn them on, are they retroactive? And I believe I gave the right answer in the chat, but I want to make sure that you answer this. So are they, when you set up sub accounts, are they retroactive, or are they only from that point moving forward?
I think there's a function to update what the default or blank version of the sub account would be, but they would only be going forward for things like budgeting. So we would definitely not have any budget lines for sub accounts in the way that we're going to see here in a minute.
Okay, and I said it was retroactive, so just I posted in the question it was retroactive because I thought that when you turn it on, that it would the accounts will all be zero basically at that point. So we might need to just make sure we test that out. So
Yeah, let me follow up on that after the call, and I'll maybe put an example together that would clarify.
that would be great. Awesome.
Good. Yeah, good question. Thank you for whoever sent that in. All right, so we're shifting gears. We're shifting from looking at the simple budget structure to what we're referring to as a hierarchical budget structure. So in this case, all that means really is that we're using something called a budget tree. We're looking at example of a screenshot here with a budget tree, and we'll see the same in our training database. We're going to take advantage of the budget configuration screen, which again is in the financial area. And budget configuration is going to allow us to group accounts within the budget and just make the accounts a little bit easier to manage. And we'll see that as we're adding or updating data for some of our budget categories, it allows us to use that preload function more efficiently than we could if we were dealing with all accounts at the same time. So in the hierarchical structure on the left-hand panel, we're seeing the different groups that are set within the budget tree, and we're also seeing at the summary level that in this case, the summary level training, that's the name of the instance, and that's a reminder that there's one budget tree structure for the entire tenant. So the budget structure that we put into place needs to make sense for all the companies, all the branches that we have in this tenant. We will, at the top level, see all the different groups that have been established, and also the idea that we can add individual accounts outside of those groups. So we have three groups: sales, salaries, and rent and office expense. And then we also have two specific accounts outside those groups for advertising and purchase expense. So for each one of these groups, what we've done is we've added an account mask, and that helps us establish which specific accounts should be part of that grouping. As an example of adding a brand new grouping or node to the budget tree, we would add a row, specify that this is going to be a node. In this case, I know I have an example of a couple accounts that are in the services area, and I can use my account mask and sub account to specify the filters that I would want to apply. And that, as you can see, adds a new grouping into my budget tree area. And now within that grouping, I can preload accounts. The system knows, based on the mask that I've used, which range of accounts I want to deal with. Click OK, and that automatically adds my supplies and utilities into my service expenses area. So that's a way of establishing different groups of accounts within a budget tree. And as we'll see when we go back to our budget screen with hierarchical budgeting, it just makes it a little easier to manage the different groups of accounts that I have and ways of managing data within those groups. So we'll go back to our budget screen. Make sure I save before I exit here. So within the budget screen, I'm going to get rid of that comparison feature. Just look at the plain, simple budget structure that we were looking at before. If I wanted to get going with a new budget, and in this case, I'm going to use that same branch, and now I've got an optimistic budget that I've already established. I'm going to establish now a less optimistic or a pessimistic budget. And as soon as I say I'd like to add a new combination of branch, ledger, and year, the system prompts me and asks if I would like to create a new budget for this year, and it's reminding me that now that I have a budget tree in the system, the new budget will be set up using that budget tree configuration. So I say yes, that's good. And I'm also going to open up the tree view, which gives me a more full view of that similar breakdown that what we were looking at in the budget configuration screen. And this will show me on a group by group level what all the accounts are within each one of the nodes or groups that I had established within the budget tree. And also at the summary level, notice that I still have those two independent accounts that haven't been included in any one of the groupings. They're just in there on their own. So that's a little bit different way of looking at the entire list of accounts that we're budgeting for. And it also opens up a little bit more efficient way of adding data in our third method. We've already talked about manually adding. We talked about uploading from file. We'll take a quick look at preloading from articles. So preloading from articles allows us, we mentioned this at the very beginning, allows us to take a look at another budget that's already existing in the system or actual data that's in the system and establishing our new budget based on those numbers. So in this case, I'm looking at my retail branch, and I would like to leverage the fact that I know I already have an optimistic budget in the system. And I know I've got that optimistic budget for 2019, and I can apply a multiplication factor. And one of the ways that that hierarchical budget is nice is that this preload budget articles is keying in on the fact that I've started this by highlighting sales. So at this point, I'm really loading the data for the sales group specifically. And the sales group might have a different multiplier than what I would want to use for salaries or rent or services expenses. So in this case, I know I've got that optimistic budget. I'm maybe slightly less optimistic or pessimistic for this budget. So I'm only going to take 90% of the sales that I had for that original optimistic budget. I confirm which accounts I'd like to set up. Again, I have different modes. I can upload for new rows only or update existing rows. And once it finishes, then that allows me to take what I had for the optimistic budget in the sales accounts, use that multiplier of 90%, and very quickly establish what are the annual amounts and all the period by period breakdown for all of my sales accounts. And notice that that's happened for sales, but I could use a different multiplication factor for salaries or rent or any of the other groupings that I had within my budget tree. So we've looked at different budget structures, the simple and the hierarchical. We've looked at 3 different ways of managing or uploading that data, the manual entry, load from file, or we just looked at the preload articles. As a final piece to this budget screen, we want to take a very quick look at the manage budget functions. There are 2 functions, 2 actions within the manage budget button. One is to roll back to the released values. We talked about once we've set the data, the next step in the process will be to release, and a way to kind of undo the changes that we've maybe made on the screen and just roll back to what are the released values for all of my accounts. I have that option here. Or the other feature within the manage budget drop down is I can take a simple budget that I had started with and or something that was maybe based on a budget tree that was set last year, and maybe I've made some updates to my budget tree. So I've got a newer, more updated budget tree structure. I am able to update the specific budget based on whatever my current budget tree structure is. So it's a way of updating to the new budget tree format in this conversion action. So those two features are available within the Manage Budget button. So that's really everything that we wanted to talk about in the Budgets feature. The next step, whatever method we've used to add data to the system, the next step would be to release that data. So I'll take a look at the release function. And the release function is going to be fairly similar to releasing transactions. Any of the updates that I've made to my budgets would be available here. I can either release all, or I can specify rows and just release the ones that I've specified, and that would allow me to then make that data available to reporting, number one, and also good to remember that once I've released the data, it can no longer be deleted. So everything that we've done up to this point, I could go back to that budget screen and delete out that row or delete that data, and I would have that flexibility. But once I've released, it can no longer be deleted. So that would make the information available to reporting. And then that's the final thing that we wanted to talk about. What are the different methods of reporting? What are some of the ways that we have of getting that budget information to screens or to generic inquiries or to reports within the system? We've already seen that within the budget screen itself, there was that really nice compare feature. So I could side by side, I could look at one budget year versus another, or a budget versus actual data. So that can be thought of as a way of reporting. Another way of reporting would be the GL budget edit. It's a very simple budget report. We're going to leave that release just the way it was. And in this case, I'm going to look at the same budget information that we had been working with in our optimistic budget for the year 2019. We'll run this report, and you can see this is a very, very straightforward breakdown of each account and sub-account combination. What amount, annual amount did we have? What was the distributed amount? How much has been released? And it's a very straightforward structure. We also have two generic inquiries that we wanted to call out. These are pretty much raw data as well. Take note of this will be in the deck, which we'll distribute to all the attendees, but the BI GL budget actual and the DB actual versus budget generic inquiries can help you get at the raw data, and then those can be set as pivot tables, and that can be used as a nice way to start pulling that data into an Excel spreadsheet and do your own analysis, or just work in a kind of a pivot table fashion. And then the final way, we're going to do a little bit of cheating and hop over here to another tenant that we've got with sales demo data. In the sales demo data, I have an ARM report that is leveraging both actual and budget information. So for my company, year to date, I want to see a side-by-side comparison, very traditional view of actual versus budget, and then you can get your variance or percentage difference between the two. And the thing to note about setting up an ARM report like this would be the key to getting that budget data into the report would be in the column set. So for those of you who maybe have a little bit of familiarity with ARM reports, within the column set, when we look at our data source, we'll notice that the data source for column B was actual data. Data source for that budget column, we just want to make sure that we're leveraging the budget ledger that we had set up. So that's where that ledger that we had talked about at the very first comes into play. We can bring that into an ARM report as long as we're sourcing that column based on the budget ledger. Thank you for your patience. I know I've gone a little bit over, and that is really everything that we wanted to cover today. If there are any questions, we would be very glad to take them.
So, John, there was one more question that came in. It says, can you compare the budget to actual by month and month to date?
Yes, you've got that budget data. In this case, we were doing a year to date, a very simple column with all data year to date. But yes, you can grab that period by period budget data and do the comparison on a month by month or quarter by quarter basis as well.
And another question came in. Can you compare 2018 to 2019 to 2020?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all based on not only would we want to leverage the budget ledger, we could compare one budget to another, or we could compare the same budget 2018, 2019, 2020, and that would just be based on our combination of which ledger do we want to use and what periods do we want to use. And that would also be part of the data source, so we can use the offset year and period to pin down exactly which fiscal year and fiscal period we wanted to be represented in that column.
So I think with these are great questions, and I think that it points out two things. First of all, we did a quick 30-minute training on the financial reports. That's up on our website, netofwork.com/blog. And there is a financial report class, 30-minute class that Dan did that he did a great job on. Also on the Acumatica Open University. Again, Acumatica Open University. If you click on ARM, and those are what the financial reports are called. So that's the technical name for them. But the financial report writer is called ARM. And that is, there's a class on ARM that's open to the public on that as well. It's about a 2-hour training on how to use this. Very powerful financial report writing tool. For those who have been in the industry for a while, we all joke around that it looks a lot like FRX, but just modernized. Great questions there. Did we answer your questions? I hope we did. If we didn't, please let us know. And I don't see any other questions coming in at this point here. Just a quick reminder, John, thank you very much for doing this presentation here. Just a quick reminder that we will be doing another one in a few weeks. That one is going to be doing bank reconciliations. I know that's a popular topic sometimes, so we'll be doing bank reconciliations. Also, for those who missed yesterday's 2020 R2 release webinar, if there's, we'll be following up to all of our clients with what they missed. They came out with several amazing features, including AP imaging and expense reimbursement or a banking integration. So two amazing things came out of there on top of a lot of other stuff, such as a point of sale module and things like that. So just again, Acumatica delivered an amazing amount of features in an amazing release. So we were all happy about that. John, thank you for putting up the last slide. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to John on the budget stuff. He did, again, great job. Definitely knows his stuff on financial accounting aspects. And so feel free to reach out to him. You can also reach out to myself. You can reach out to us at Net of Work from down below. Please, again, look at our blogs, look at our YouTube videos that we put out there, and appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you, everybody.